What was your favorite childhood toy? Was it Gumby, My Little Pony, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? For me, it was a little-known brand called Webkinz. Webkinz, for those who may be too young to remember, were stuffed animals where you get a little code and you could scan it into their website. Doing so, you'd be able to play puzzles, build houses for them, and connect with friends. It was a huge thing growing up that we continued to do as the internet slowly got bigger. So, when I heard about a horror franchise that was inspired by the 90s and 2000 toys that I grew up with, I completely ignored it. Why? Because when the game came out, I was 18 and about to start university. It was a lot of change, and anything that wasn't social or academically related had to get cut out. And this is pretty common from what I've heard from my friends who are around my age about Poppy Playtime. I'd heard it compared to franchises I love like Five Nights at Freddy's and Bendy and the Ink Machine, but I just didn't have enough time to dedicate myself to a new franchise until I got a notification on my phone. My favorite YouTuber, Astral Spiff, was about to go live with Poppy Playtime Chapter 5. And then, when it was released, I started seeing people criticize it and give it so much backlash, including other famous YouTubers such as Markiplier and Queso. And I finally was intrigued enough to see for myself what Poppy Playtime was all about. And yeah, Poppy Playtime does have a few problems, but I argue it isn't just because there's too many puzzles. Howdy hey, my name is Raylan, and today we're going to be dissecting the Poppy Playtime problems. If you like this video, please leave a like and comment in the section down below, and while you're at it, might as well hit subscribe to see when I upload next. I'm a really small channel, and it really does help a lot if you do so. And without further ado,
Rabbit, these new tricks are for kids.
one of the biggest defining traits about Mascot horrors is that it can basically be enjoyed by anyone, usually getting classified as T for teen in the USRB ratings. But one glance at any comment section of a Poppy Playtime video or talking to anyone around the age of 8, and you'll see that they probably know more about the lore than anyone my age. But why is that important? I mean, I was a huge fan of Five Nights at Freddy's when it came out when I was 12. Isn't that roughly the same thing? Well, kind of. There is a huge criticism that I'm sure plenty of you heard of, but has been reiterated, especially with this newest chapter. That being... And yeah, I agree. But this is where we have to consider the target audience. For those of you unaware of what a target audience is basically the audience that a company wants to focus on. A really good example of this is a baby stroller company is not going to target 45-year-old men who are single. Instead, they're going to target younger couples that had just had a kid. And now it gets slightly tricky for video games or movies or anything that is supposed to be consumed and enjoyed by all audiences. Because of the question, which audience do you focus on? The safe and common choice is to always focus on your youngest audience, since they usually have the more restrictions that are required in order to allow for them to watch it, such as no cursing and nudity and many more. But it does not mean it needs to be bluey in order to pass these qualifications. It is a delicate balance that any company has to do when they're trying to keep their younger audience as well as their older fan bases. This is why we have hidden adult jokes in kids' movies, and for the case of Poppy Playtime, why it can't be too scary. If the gameplay is too scary, Mob Entertainment risks losing, or worse, traumatizing little kids and isolating a huge part of their audience. If you think that shouldn't be the case, as you have to be 13 years older to be on YouTube, most of the biggest channels on YouTube are dedicated to all ages content, or just kids. This is where you can see Mob has slowly been experimenting with each chapter to see what is too scary versus what is not. People regard chapter 1 and 3 as the scariest, whereas chapter 2, 4, and especially 5 has been commonly criticized for lacking that factor. Comparing that to the likes of Five Nights at Freddy's or Tattletale, in which they have seemingly been good at balancing being scary and all ages friendly. Let's remember that these two franchises are directly playing into a common human fear of animatronics and its uncanny valley. Kids, and especially grown adults, are not inherently scared of stuffed animals, and instead are actually encouraged to love and appreciate them, starting when we are infants. This is an uphill battle in trying to cause someone to suddenly switch from a loving attitude to a scared attitude. In fact, a lot of Mascot horror games have to face this, with varying levels of success. But on top of it being intentionally not as scary as other franchises such as Last of Us, Resident Evil, and Outlast, there is actually another factor that is causing this issue. Let's talk about Scream, or really any slasher-style film. The first few moments of this movie are known as a cold open kill, meaning the main antagonist usually brutally murders a bunch of characters at the very beginning of the movie, establishing how horrific and the mechanics of their killings. This is super important in this genre because it not only allows for the audience to know that the main antagonist is scary and evil, but also its methodology, style, and the atmosphere. In Scream, the killer tends to call first, asking to play a game, then kills with a hunting knife, and now we know its atmosphere is high schoolers. This allows for the audience to start theorizing who and who isn't capable of these things and what are their limitations. Side note, this is also why The Terrifier is known as the most scariest slasher, because it defies all these. So, what does this have to do with Poppy Playtime? This is the moment that the main antagonist is at its scariest. Why? Because we know absolutely nothing about him except the cold open kill, similar to Chapter 1. Chapter 1 in and of itself is a cold open. It tells you absolutely nothing about the factory or its inhabitants, and you slowly learn why you are there and what has happened through VHSs lying around the rooms. We get comfortable with the grab pack and we do a few puzzles to continue, resulting in establishing the atmosphere and style of the game in these sections, all while knowing that something bad has happened here and we are not alone. This is a big reason why this chapter feels so scary on a first playthrough, constantly having things look a little wrong or Huggy disappearing when you turn your back on him gives the players enough of a heightened sense of caution. You are wary of your surroundings, knowing something is watching you, and finally, instead of a big slaughter, we get a Huggy Wuggy chase sequence. But, like slasher films, once you know more and more about the antagonist, you lose this caution. Arguably, 1 and 2 are very similar in horror element, with 2 exceptions. In Chapter 2, you have a companion in Poppy, and there are characters actually talking to the player. Companions tend to bring comfort during scary moments, lessening the blow. This is utilized a lot in the Last of Us franchise. And not to mention, the talking antagonist of Mommy Longlegs starts to humanize the character, and at first is not a deal breaker. We'll see how this really ends up hurting the game in the long run. This is a prime example of mob entertainment balancing between the kid-friendly and the scary line. While the stakes are higher here, being multiple opportunities to die as well as a bigger chapter in general, there are counterbalances with the addition of Poppy and the talking characters. Then Chapter 3 releases, being renowned as one of the best chapters for equal parts horror, story, and gameplay. This chapter puts the nail on the head of what a Poppy Playtime chapter should entail. It opens with the player being picked up and dragged by this strange-looking purple cat throwing us down the garbage chute. Disoriented and confused, the player must travel through a more darkened atmosphere, literally darkened, until randomly we get a call from Gregory. I mean, Sally. Then we enter a hub in which we are slowly opening up different areas of the Playcare facility, learning more and more about our purpose for being in this factory. This is honestly beautifully done in a way that just captivates the audience. We get to physically see the different aspects of the hub, gathering interest and also allowing for players to feel a sense of power and conquer with completing each new area. That's the beauty of Chapter 3. We start out completely powerless in a more sinister and grimmer location, and with each new section we learn to gain back our control, feel like we are powerful enough to defeat Catnap and whatever Playcare has to offer. And not to mention, the horror sequences are phenomenal for this game, and it allows for the audience to still grow in power but have a slight hesitation of distrust around every corner and everything they do. Even the final boss incorporates this haunting element. Honestly, as a new person to this franchise, this chapter is by far my favorite when it comes to horror. Okay, but what about chapters 4 and 5? This is when the player is starting to know too much about the factory, and it's going to be a lot harder for them to scare. One of the biggest challenges for anything horror related is that too much of something will make it less scary. For example, let's say you're a beginner snowboarder and you want to snowboard down your first mountain. Chapter 1, you're at the bottom with all your gear on. You pray you remember everything that you practiced earlier, and you're heading towards a ski lift. Chapter 2 is boarding the ski lift, jumping off the seat, and slowly making your way to the start of the route. And looking down, wow, this is really patched together. I'm so sorry, future me. Staring down at the bottom from thousands of feet up. Chapter 3 is going down the mountain. At first, you're uncertain, scared, but slowly but surely, you gain confidence, and eventually, you feel a sense of triumphant as you faced your fears. And Chapter 4 and 5, well, they're just other mountains. Sure, they have their own twists and turns and challenges, but nothing will be as scary as your first mountain. Not to say that being less scary makes it bad. It just means that mob entertainment has to balance and trade out the scary factor for something else. And they do. They make you feel empathetic to all the characters around you. All these creatures used to be kids at one point, and even they are scared of this big bad they call the prototype. Something that has been hinted at since the very first chapter. But here is where the gameplay starts to make less sense and fall flat.
We're the game of chase sequences. We are the chase sequence game.
Yeah, if you haven't already seen both Markiplier and Queso's review of Poppy Playtime Chapter 5, I highly recommend watching them, because both of them do put the gameplay issue in a quick few sentences. In summary though, the chase sequences, starting in Chapter 4 and especially in Chapter 5, feel like padded time. They're not here just to enhance the stakes, but instead just because that's what they are known for. Then, adding the fact of new mechanics that have not been previously done really does put a poor taste in your mouth. Though, what I'm about to argue is that the latter is the most frustrating part. This game is cut into chapters, but it does not feel like it's a part of one game. It feels like it's 5 separate games that has been stitched together on Steam, which is a huge issue. If you haven't already played Poppy Playtime back to back, I challenge you to do so. Because when I tell you it's like a roller coaster that starts as a kid ride but ends up with 25 different drops and loops and all sorts of things that you never expected, it's very jarring. Heck, even the UI has changed so much from Chapter 1 to Chapter 5, they don't even feel like the same game. And I understand that Mob Entertainment has improved their skills over time, but please, for the love of all things, at least make a unified UI system. Bendy and the Ink Machine had the same problem, but eventually they went back and fixed and unified everything, despite the obvious growth between chapters. This disconnection also means that even though thematically we are improving and gaining confidence as the story continues, mechanically, every single chapter has you lose a hand, restart your grab pack, or simply never use a mechanic that you were previously established. This is why I believe Markiplier was so frustrated with this chapter. These chapters are not unified at all. Besides having the main character here, and roughly starting where the previous chapter ended, these could be completely different games, and it would feel that way not only story-wise, but mechanically as well. Then, not to mention, Chapter 5's pacing is very story-driven at the beginning and the end, with a lot of puzzles in between to pad time. It reminds me a lot of KH3's pacing, in which we are also dumped a lot of lore at the very beginning of the game and at the very end of the game, with just standard gameplay in between. I make this comparison because Kingdom Hearts gameplay is arguably really good, but even with good gameplay, having it paced like this makes it more fatiguing and boring compared to KH1 or KH2. Queso said it best when comparing the story versus the gameplay in Poppy Playtime.
The lore and the characters and everything in Poppy Playtime is the most goated thing literally ever, but the gameplay is quite literally just filler until the next cutscene or the next, monster shows up.
Open the door.
No voice match found.
Voice match? What kind of sci-fi bullshit is this?
A lot of people have been comparing this game to Resident Evil, a horror zombie survival game, due to it having the commonalities of horror and puzzles. But I think that another game called Little Nightmares is a much better comparison. In Resident Evil, the puzzles are a big part of the gameplay, but are arguably a secondary component, in which inventory management and shooting elements are more of the forefront. Whereas Little Nightmares is almost exactly like Poppy Playtime, in which it is a horror game with chase sequences and puzzles. Not to mention the first 2 games were created by Tarsier Studios, though who had some experience in the gaming industry was still quite small comparatively. So comparing the two feels a lot more fair than comparing a first-time studio to a franchise that has had 30 years to perfect its craft. So So what makes Little Nightmares chases and puzzles feel more impactful than those from Poppy Playtime? Well, like what was criticized about Poppy earlier, Little Nightmares chases actually do get harder and more evolved with each new edition, as well as considering the player's mobility improvement by the end of the game. And for the puzzles, they can be broken down into 3 things. They are environmental based, they are smaller but allow for more impactful progression, and if optional, results in a meaningful reward. Starting with environmentally based, this is something that Poppy has often struggled with. In Little Nightmares, the main antagonists are huge and vicious. You can tell this world was intended for them, making the small protagonists feel like they don't belong there. In turn, all the puzzles revolve around this concept. Whether we have to press buttons the size of our heads or crawl through tiniest spaces in order to traverse, every puzzle, regardless of how small, feels realistic to the setting we are in. And in Poppy Playtime, well...
Electric shock showers. Don't you make toys!
Yeah, the puzzles, though more complex than most of the ones in Little Nightmares, are honestly more frustrating, confusing than increasing immersion within this toy factory. Smaller but more impactful can simply be boiled down to none of the bigger puzzles in Little Nightmares took me more than 30 minutes to get. And call me dumb, but some of the Poppy Playtime puzzles had me staring and trying 500 different things before I finally gave up and watched a playthrough. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the worst thing, but when watching playthroughs of Chapter 5 and seeing so many people struggle with this, as well as my own, that is not necessarily a good sign. The last one is definitely more subjective, but I think it's safe to say most people like cosmetics. I mean, games like Fortnite or Marvel Rivals make millions off of being able to change your favorite character's skin. In Little Nightmares, if you go out of your way to explore and look for collectibles, you are rewarded with little hats or masks to put on your character, as well as concept art and achievements. In Poppy Playtime, we receive lore, which sometimes feels like it's necessary to understand the main character's purpose or the people around us, or just collectibles for the sake of it. I do realize they are actively working on adding achievements, which will help improve replayability and encourage exploration, but still, not everyone is an achievement hunter. And of course, let's not forget the elephant in the room. Since I have not been following this 5-year-long build-up, I honestly didn't have any grand expectations. I didn't have the theories or the fan art to hype this big bad. And honestly, I don't know what I would have expected if I had. To me, he kind of looks like the Monster Inc. spider with Majora's Mask on its face. Though, I'm not here to talk about the design elements. There have been plenty of other YouTubers who have done their own videos on it, and I'd highly recommend you go and watch those. What I will say is that the jester is supposed to be the butt of a joke. They are the king's entertainer, which does not do well to symbolize the prototype in my opinion. It makes me believe that he is also just a puppet, but he's not supposed to be, right? I'm super confused about the prototype's motivation. Heck, I'm super confused about anyone's motivation in this game. I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense why Spoon Man even came here to investigate, let alone go deeper into the facility. The dude should have turned around as soon as he saw Huggy disappear. It's something that I think this game has fundamentally got jumbled up over the years, and I'm super curious to see what the motivation was originally planned for back in 2021. But back to the prototype, sure. I can understand that his dad didn't love him enough compared to his sister, but it makes it 10 times more confusing when you realize he's adopted, I think? He was literally chosen to be a part of the family, and not in the chosen to be experimented on, though that is what happens eventually. To my knowledge, he was just a proof of concept. Then going into the actual real story elements, why would he kill Catnap? Why would he kill Huggy? I understand Kissy and Poppy since they are on the opposing team, but Catnap literally worshipped him. And Huggy was an antagonist through and through, with one exception that results in his death. And then, why does the prototype put the main character that he seemingly wants to kill into a literal revival tank? I'm so confused about the purpose and motivations of the prototype, and it frustrates me more than it should. If anyone understood the ending better than me, I'd love for a comment down below explaining it, so I can finally understand his motivation and everything. So I just spent quite a few minutes discussing the problems I noticed in Poppy Playtime, but how do we fix it?
I can't leave it like this, Ridian.
Okay, While I recognize that not everything in this video I've discussed can be fixed, I would be remiss to try to not provide at least a little bit of a solution. For I've always been told, don't bring up problems without solutions to back them up. So let's rapid fire some quick fixes. To be honest, I think Poppy Playtime's experimenting has been quite good when it comes from the balance. My solution would be to stop adding new characters and allow for the characters established to be built up their scary factor. If the prototype is supposed to be the next William Afton, give him a good reason to be the next William. Let's witness him be horrific and terrifying. Having this built up upon maybe a darker level design would do wonders to not make it too scary for kids and not scary at all for adults. This one is going to be hard because I just said don't introduce any new characters if the prototype is supposed to be the next big bag for this concluding arc. But I have one thought. We just had the jarring death of Kissy and Huggy, along with the disappearance of Poppy. This is a huge exposure to seeing how cruel the prototype can be. Use it to your advantage. Show the chaos that is occurring because Poppy and Kissy are gone. What if Huggy was actually controlling his area, keeping the worst, smaller creatures at bay? Make this factory have a fallout. Is this guy going to turn evil with power now? What about this one? If the prototype makes one decision that results in a chain of horrific events, it will not only elevate the prototype's power and scary element, but it will also show the importance of the main protagonist. But that's my 2 cents. This is pretty simple to say and much harder to do, but less puzzles and add more exciting story or other gameplay elements sprinkled in. Duly note, I'm not a game developer. I just play a lot of video games, so I can see where things go wrong and why they don't feel the way they do on a surface level. However, in this section in particular, I don't have the foreknowledge of how to technically fix this. But I'm sure there are other YouTube videos and brilliant minds at Mob Entertainment that are experimenting with these things as we speak.
What's this?
But despite everything that I've mentioned in this video, I actually really do enjoy Poppy Playtime. It does have some flaws and there were points where I was bored or frustrated, but that doesn't stop me from wanting to continue the series. I really love the character designs. I'm so curious to see what they're gonna do with Huggy and Kissy because there's absolutely no way they're actually dead. And I really want to know what are the motivations and what is causing all of the troubles that are going on in this factory. I mean, I'm still desperately confused on who the heck Spoon Man really is, and I would love an explanation on that. So yeah, I will probably also make a video on chapter 6 when that comes out. If you do want that, please let me know in the comments below, and I will get right to it when the chapter releases. Who knows, maybe by then I'll be big enough where I can stream it live. So what are your thoughts on Poppy Playtime? Have you been a fan since it came out? Is this the first time you've heard of it? Please let me know in the comments down below. Like I mentioned before, I am a super small channel and every like, comment, and subscription really helps out a ton. Let me know what you want me to cover next. This has been Raylan, and I'll see you all in the next one. Play on, gamers. I actually also bought Yarnaby off of their website, but I don't know where it is. It was a pre-order, but I ordered it about a month ago and it said it was supposed to be here 3 weeks ago, and it has not.